As we said before, everyone's a critic, and it seems that those critics are still yammering on about horror classics that you should just move on from, forget all about them, they're not worth your time. But they're wrong, because some horror movies got such a bum deal at the box office that many of them didn't manage to survive the critical onslaught. Luckily for them, however, we're back to bring justice. So let's do it. Hello horror fans, what's going on? And once again, welcome back to the Scary channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. As per usual, I'll be your horror host, Jack FINCH. Today we curiously take a look at the top 5 greatest horror movies that were slammed by critics, part 2. And luckily for us, we're super stoked to announce that this video is sponsored by Shudder. And all of the films featured on this list can be found over on their awesome must-have platform for any horror fan. Shudder is the premium streaming video service from AMC Networks that was built to specifically super serve fans of all degrees of thrillers, suspense, and horror movies, which, you know, hint, is you guys. You can stream all of these movies and hundreds more for $5.99 a month or $56.99 a year, so you can buy your ticket to the largest and fastest growing human curated selection of horror cinema ever created. You'll have unlimited access to stream completely ad-free on all of your favorite devices, Chromecast, Roku, and Amazon Fire included. Thankfully for me, the good people over at Shudder hooked us up with a sub so I could compile this list just for you horror fans. How nice is that? And if you'd like to try Shudder for free for 30 days, go to shudder.com and use our exclusive promo code TOP5 to check out the awesomeness that is Shudder. Seriously, there are so many underrated gems on that service that it'll pay for itself within an evening's worth of horror binge watching. Also, Mandy is on there with Nick Cage, and holy moly is that movie fantastically weird. Shudder gave me the opportunity to watch that film, and so should you. On with the show. Kicking off at number 5, Black Christmas, 1974. What a fantastic movie, right? Because now, in the safe confines of 2019, we can look back from a staggering distance and check out how near perfection the coldest, most Christmas Canadian slasher of all time really was. But back then, in 1974, holy moly, you would have thought this film had ushered forth the second coming of the Antichrist. And you know what? I can partly understand the mechanics behind these reviews, because for the most part, the most prolific means of media were in the hands of some pretty conservative individuals. It was the 70s, guys, and if you wanted to be a radical, you just got to voice your opinion in a coffee shop or something. But really, with Black Christmas, no one quite understood slasher horror. And that was the point as to its scathing reviews. During its initial release, Variety described Black Christmas as a bloody, senseless kill-for-kicks feature that exploits unnecessary violence in a university sorority house operated by an implausibly alcoholic's ex-hoofer. I mean, if you're asking me, that's pretty offensive to Mrs. McHenry, but whatever. Who criticizes the critics, right? For those of you that don't know, Black Christmas is a 1974 Canadian classic of slasher cinema, directed by Bob Clark and written by A. Roy Moore. It tells the tale of a young group of sorority sisters about to depart for the Christmas break, headed by their house mother, Mrs. McHenry, who quickly find themselves at the mercy of a deranged madman who calls them over the phone and gradually picks the group off one by one. It's a simple premise, really, but for a slasher film, there's a surprising amount of intellect packed inside its low moments that only serves to build the suspense to one literal killer of an ending. Back then, Black Christmas shocked people for all the wrong reasons, but now we can appreciate it all for the right ones. Also, Olivia Hussey and Margot Kidder are brilliant in this movie. Give it a watch. Swinging in at number 4, Wolf Creek, 2005. Guys, where do I begin? The thing is, this one is really difficult to tackle because, for the most part, I can understand the criticism 2005's Wolf Creek garnered. I can. But just because I can understand it, that doesn't ever mean that it's fair or that it's accurate enough to form a holistic opinion around. So we can just regard it and say, yeah, this film is trash, let's not give it any kind of artistic merit. But no, I think at the time of its release, journalism painted Wolf Creek with an unfairly unfavourable brush. Yes, this film is exploitative. Yes, this film is bleak and violent and full of blood and guts. But does it earn it? Yes, it earns it by the bucket load, and no, although critics heralded it as such, this film is not just another brick in the questionable wall that is the torture porn genre. In fact, this film is perhaps the only time that particular subgenre ever got it right. You see, Wolf Creek earns its violence by performance alone. Written and directed by Greg McLean, Wolf Creek is a phenomenal Australian horror that gave way to some of the greatest modern depictions from that particular neck of Down Under. It tells the tale of three backpackers making their way across the Australian outback, Liz, Kirsty and Ben, who after stopping at Wolf Creek National Park stumble upon a rural man, Mick Taylor, played by John Jarratt, whose performance alone is enough to watch this movie, and then things quickly turn from bad to worse for the trio. The plot is indeed simple. It plays on a very simple fear, stranger danger and the absence of the home, but Wolf Creek propels its way forward by character alone. But in such a small instance of narrative, there is a hell of a lot of character development, and for an otherwise unknown cast at the time, the acting clout in Wolf Creek is huge. This film is genuinely terrifying, and it's an important entry into the global history of horror. Next up at number 3, Tenebrae, 1982. Yeah, sorry if that's kind of spoilers, but you won't be watching an Argento film for the plot, right? The point is, historically speaking, in cinema, Argento defined the meaning of style over substance, because let's face it, this film has a 4-minute tracking shot that makes no sense whatsoever, is unneeded for the most part when you apply it to the film as a whole, but it works because it's Dario Argento. The fact that this film was so unfairly criticised for its content alone is like criticising an oil painting. Listen, in horror cinema, there are physical effects and then there are giallo effects. They're a matter of taste. That's all. Any wound and any depiction of blood in this movie is so highly stylized that in hindsight it's kind of laughable that people were genuinely offended by the violence in this film. In fact, the Italian censors of Tenebrae pretty much cut out all of the scenes that made this film even coherent, and the United States version butchered it so much that the entire movie became incomprehensible. In that case, what was the point in even releasing it? In hindsight though, which we thankfully have the pleasure of enjoying right now in the present, Tenebrae is perhaps one of Argento's greatest creative pieces. Written and directed by the legendary Dario Argento, Tenebrae tells the tale of Peter Neal, an American horror novelist living in Rome who suspects that a notorious serial killer may be using his works of fiction to inspire his murderous killing spree. In classic giallo fashion, the plot unwinds its way in relative uncertainty, casting its gaze upon suspect as we try to tentatively keep up with Argento's impeccable eye for detail and setting a scene, and step through a myriad of beautiful and increasingly violent set pieces. This film is vivid, it's visually articulate, and in some respects it's considered one of Argento's greatest films for a reason. Obviously only in retrospect, because it took about 10 years for the critics and censors to get over the fact that a prosthetic arm got chopped off with an axe. Go figure. It's on Shudder, so go check it out for yourself. Coming in at number 2, The Exorcist 3, 1990. The Exorcist 3. Why were you bashed so vehemently by critics? Why? What did you ever do to them other than being perhaps one of the greatest demonic possession horror movies ever made? One that could even rival 1973's The Exorcist itself. I don't know, but it kind of makes me sad, partly because this film still doesn't get the critical recognition it deserves, and partly because I'm pretty sure the vast majority of critics didn't even watch this film. Entertainment Weekly said, if Part 2 sequels are genuinely disappointing, Part 3s are often much, much worse. Nothing is going on in them except dim murmurings about the original movie. They then went on to say, The Exorcist 3 is an ash grey disaster or a horror movie made by a depressed monk. Well, yeah, maybe it was made by a depressed monk, but that depressed monk is William Peter Blatty, the author of the original Exorcist, and that guy knew how to tell a horror story and thus knew how to make a horror movie. Really, The Exorcist 3 is phenomenal, and whilst I'm fairly confident that most of the critics never watched the entirety of this film, the main reason why its criticism was so widespread is because of a little unhappy accident known as The Exorcist 2. It's no secret that the sequel to William Friedkin's 1973 classic was an absolute disaster of horror cinema. It was. There's no beating about the bush or denying it. It just wasn't a good movie. But to use that as reason to completely dismiss William Peter Blatty's attempt, which was an adaptation based on his novel Legion that inadvertently continued the horrific story of Pazuzu and his host of demonic legions, wrapped up in the terrifying Gemini killer, yeah, that's just not fair. This film is really, really good. It deserves heaps of praise, so give it a watch and you won't be disappointed. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Night of the Living Dead, 1968. You know what, horror fans, it kind of makes me sad that this film appears on this list, but again, similar to 2005's Wolf Creek, I understand it. But again, whilst I understand it, it doesn't make them right. Listen to this quote from Variety following the premiere of Night of the Living Dead in 1968. "Until the Supreme Court establishes clear-cut guidelines for the pornography of violence, Night of the Living Dead will serve nicely as an outer limit definition by example. In a mere 90 minutes, this horror film, pun intended, casts serious aspersions on the integrity and social responsibility of its Pittsburgh-based makers, as well as raising doubts about the future of the regional cinema movement and about the moral health of filmgoers who cheerfully opt for this unrelieved orgy of sadism." You see what I mean? In fact, it was strange because every single critic that had a word to say about Night of the Living Dead seemed to be singing from the same exact hymn sheet. Their critique was so uniformly regimented that it was almost as if they'd been paid to tar this movie with the same brush without ever looking at the actual content of George A. Romero's piece of cinema. Thankfully for us though, they weren't the only voices raising the merit of 1968's Night of the Living Dead, and although not as widespread, there were a considerable number of critics who praised Romero's work as a new landmark for horror cinema. And they were right, but more importantly, the audience was right, and Night of the Living Dead was the most successful and profitable horror film ever made that was produced outside the walls of a major studio. The audience went to see it because they were fans of horror cinema, and they were well and truly horrified. That's the point, after all, right? Well, there we have it, horror fans, our list for the top 5 greatest horror movies that were slammed by critics, part 2. What do you guys think? Do you agree, disagree, have any more to add to this list? Then let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Before we depart from today's video, we'd just like to give a huge thank you again to our sponsor, Shudder, and make sure to check out our exclusive promo code TOP5 so you can try out their awesome service for free for a month. Seriously, check it out and see what's good. They've got an awesome film on there called Brick, directed by Rian Johnson, which is an awesome noirish mystery starring a young Joseph Gordon-Levitt. So there you go. Reason enough to go and check it out, right? Well, on that note, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for in today's video. Cheers for sticking around all the way until the end. If you were a fan of this video or just top 5 scary videos in general, then please be a dear and hit that thumbs up button, as well as that subscribe bell, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. As per usual, I've been your horror host, Jack Finch. You've been watching top 5 scary videos. And until next time, you take it easy.